You might think it's you when, in fact, it's somebody else. You might think your computer is, hello? You might think your computer is obeying you, when really it's obeying the real master first. And then it only obeys you when the real master says it's okay. With every program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. This is a free program. It's free software if the users control it, and that's why it respects their freedom. Otherwise, it's a non-free, proprietary, user subjugating program. In order for the program to be free, practically speaking, it must give the users the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is to run the program however you wish for whatever purpose you have. Freedom 1 is, hello? A slide has disappeared. Well, in any case, freedom 1 is the freedom to study and change the source code. Now, you can see some source code that's like a mixture of English and math. If you've learned that programming language, you can read it and understand it, and then you can change it. But to run it, we convert it into executable code, which is very hard for anybody to understand. That's called reverse engineering. So practically speaking, in order for users to be free to study and change the program, they've got to have the source code. So freedom 1 is freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing activity the way you wish. Now, these two freedoms give us separate control. So each user controls per copies. I'm free to change my copies, you're free to change your copies. Well, this is essential, but it's not enough because most users don't know how to program, but they also deserve control over their computing. And the way we give it to them is through collective control, meaning the freedom to work in a group to exercise control over what the program does. Here you see a group of 3 users. 2 of them are changing the code. They must be programmers. And the third one is not changing the code. Maybe that's a person, a user of the program who doesn't program, doesn't write code, but they discuss together what changes to make. So even the non-programmer participates in having control over what that program does. And then there are 2 other users who are also using the program, but they're not working with those 3. It's up to you whether you work with other people, and it's up to them too. Those who want to work together, they do, and when they don't, they don't. Collective control is the way that non-programmers can participate in deciding what that program should do. And it requires 2 more freedoms. Freedom 2 is to make exact, unmodified copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. Now, selling is perfectly legitimate because we don't say it has to be gratis. That's not our issue. Freedom is our issue. So when the program carries these 4 freedoms, the users control it, it respects their freedom, that's free software. But if one of these freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the program controls the users and the proprietor controls the program. So this program, because it's not free software, is an instrument of unjust power. It gives the proprietor power over the program's users. This by itself is a reason why non-free software is an injustice. Non-free software should not exist. Non-free software oppresses its users, and therefore I won't use it. I don't have any. I go out of my way to make sure nobody does that to me. And I also, because of my conscience, refuse to help do that to other people. I've got to treat them ethically too. It's not just I who deserves freedom, it's everyone who deserves freedom for the same reasons in the same way. Well, this is the first injustice, but because the proprietors know that they have power over users, they're tempted to mistreat users with that power. They put in malicious functionalities. This is why the widely used proprietary programs are typically malware. And among other things, they often spy on their users. Here's a shocking example. This is Amazon's ebook reader, the Amazon Swindle. It transmits from time to time the name of the book being read and the page number to Amazon servers. If the user enters any notes, they're sent to Amazon too. Total Orwellian surveillance of the user. Now, when I find out a product is this malicious, I would never think of using it. I say, absolutely not. I don't care what convenience or options or choices it offers me. I refuse to be oppressed this way. Take that swindle and step on it. And lots of proprietary programs spy. Windows spies, Mac OS spies, iOS spies, Flash Player spies. Thousands of apps spy on the user. And then there are there's another one that's missing here too. Strange. There was a picture here of the Shitbit, the device that keeps track of how you walk and sends the data to a company and then says, would you like to buy this data back from me, data about you yourself? And who else can I sell it to? The point is, that's an advanced form of spying. Whenever there's an app or a product that's tied to a particular server, that's something automatically that's going to shaft you. And that's why the Internet of Things, well, I call it the Internet of Stings. It's a way that these companies can get power over more things in your life, snoop on more things in your life, and have total power. And they start by saying it's optional. And then your insurance company says, if you use it, we'll give you a discount. And slowly that morphs into, if you don't use it, we're going to charge you extra. And almost everybody feels compelled to say yes. And if we applied that kind of standard to consent to sex, it would be basically defining that there's always consent, isn't there? Which shows it's the wrong standard to apply, and it's wrong here too. When people are systematically pressured into saying yes, they're not really saying yes. This is another kind of malicious functionality, DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, the functionality of stopping people from doing the things they want to do. Any device with DRM is clearly designed to fight against the user. So that's malware. Then there is the back door of functionality to let somebody remotely attack the user. The Amazon Swindle has a backdoor for erasing books. We saw this in 2009. Amazon remotely erased thousands of books, thousands of copies of the same book. It was 1984 by George Orwell. So, of course, this stimulated a lot of criticism. So Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Right. Even if Amazon had meant that seriously, it would not be an adequate response. But Amazon didn't mean it seriously. It was just supposed to sound like a promise, supposed to take away the momentum from the critics, because a few years later, Amazon went back to remotely erasing books at a distance, by force, without even an order from the state. And then there's censorship. The iPhone introduced the practice of designing general-purpose computers to censor the application software. And when users who didn't like being afflicted with censorship found ways to bypass the censorship and install unapproved applications or their own applications. They called it jailbreaking, which means, in effect, the iPhone is a jail. That's what we call it. Well, then there is the universal backdoor. Windows has had a universal backdoor since Windows XP. A universal backdoor means that they can forcibly change the software at a distance. It's a universal backdoor in the same sense that a computer is a universal computing engine. It can be programmed to do absolutely any nasty thing to the user. Just write the code to do that nasty thing and forcibly install it. Another system that, Windows has had it since Windows XP. And nowadays, Microsoft even admits it. Since Windows 7, Microsoft admits that there's a universal backdoor. But that's not the only thing. Portable phones, every portable phone has a universal backdoor. That's how they remotely convert them into full-time listening devices. So, what is a mobile phone? It tracks a person's movements all the time. It's always sending signals saying, here I am, here's where you should tell me about phone calls or text messages. It has to do that, in order for it to function. But the effect is that the phone company finds out always where it is and can localize it very precisely by triangulation from multiple towers. And it gets more accurate every year as they add more towers. And with the back door, they can convert it into a full-time listening device that hears all the conversation in the room, even when it's not making any call, even when it's supposed to be switched off. You see, a mobile phone has no off switch. It only has a button saying, would you please be so kind as to switch off? But once it's been modified, it is not so kind anymore. It doesn't switch off. You push the button and it pretends to switch off, but it keeps running and listening and transmitting all the time. I call this Stalin's dream. This is what Stalin would have yearned for. If someone had told Stalin, I'll show you how to make a device, they'll be cheap, you can give one to everybody in the Soviet Union, and it will send signals saying where they are all the time, and all their conversations will be listened to and sent back to headquarters if you're interested in them. Stalin would have said, wow, that's wonderful, design it for me, and then he would have killed you. But the point is, Stalin couldn't do that. It might have been too far-fetched even for him to dream of. But this is what's happening today. And I expect that most of you here have made the mistake of starting to carry one of these devices. I never have, because I see how horrible it is. And I know how much this kind of surveillance is dangerous to democracy. People, of course, are intimidated individually, but I realize that the threat to democracy is even worse. I can refuse to be intimidated, but I can't keep democracy going if people are scared to be whistleblowers and talk to journalists. So I know I've got to fight to put an end to this kind of surveillance. And this is why I don't carry a mobile phone and never have, because it's my duty as a citizen. It's not so much that I'm concerned they might be listening to me, because I don't have that kind of secret very much in my life. No, it's simply that I think it's everyone's duty to refuse, and I'm doing my duty, even if others are not yet doing their duty. I've got to set an example to try to convince more people to do their duty, to reject these systems of massive, pervasive surveillance. If you're using any proprietary software, most likely some of it is malware. I've already given you examples like Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android. They all have malware in them. Malware means a program designed to run in a way that hurts the user, and those programs are malware. But there are a lot of other proprietary programs which might or might not be malware, and we don't know.
We require more minerals.
The same developers that attempted to make them malware also prevent us from finding out whether they're malware. This is a situation that's a recipe for corruption. So of course, power corrupts. The developers of proprietary software face this temptation, and a lot of them are corrupt, and the rest we don't know. There are dozens of proprietary programs we know are malware, and then there are thousands more where we don't know and we can't find out. So every proprietary
We require more minerals.
Certain malware or possible malware, which means you can never have a rational basis to trust it. It's blind faith or nothing. Shut your eyes and take your risk. The only way to have a rational basis to trust a program is if it's free software, because then the users are checking it from time to time. That's the only defense against malware.
We require more
the only known
minerals.
defense. It's not perfect, because users are not systematically checking everything all the time. So we can't guarantee that a free program is malware, but at least we've got a fighting chance. If you use a proprietary program, you're basically asking to be taken. So that's why we developed the GNU plus Linux system, why you should escape and come to the free world. However, you've got to be selective about which GNU/Linux distro you use. GNU/Linux is basically the GNU operating system, which I started in 1984, plus Linux, which is the kernel, which was combined with GNU in 1992. And basically, it's a free operating system, but there are thousands of distros, and most of them contain some non-free software, as you can see up there. The red things are non-free applications, non-free drivers, whatever. And over there, you see a distro that's entirely free software. There are a few of those. Look at gnu.org/distros for details to find the free distros. Now, when you release a free program, there are two different ways. Actually, there are lots, but I don't have time to talk about all those details.
We require more
You can
minerals.
release it under a weak license or pushover license that doesn't have to say no. Things like the Apache license or the DSP license or the two different so-called MIT licenses. Those are weak licenses. They don't know how to say no. They say, oh, take this code and do whatever you like with it. And what happens is companies come over and they take that code and they turn it into a proprietary program and use it to impose their power on users. And that's bad. You shouldn't let them do that, because that way your code becomes part of subjugating people. You're not the one subjugating them, someone else is, but you could have refused. And the way to do that is with copyleft, with the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL, which says, use this. You do whatever you like.
We require more minerals.
Other people's freedom too.
We require more.
The GPL says you have the freedom to distribute copies with or without modifications, but there's a condition about how you distribute those copies. You must provide the source code of what you distribute, and you must provide it under the same license, the same GNU General Public License. And this way, you must respect the freedom of other users in the same way that we respected freedom for you. You must pass along the code, including your changes and additions, with the same freedoms that you got from us. The idea of copyleft is to actively defend freedom for others. Because as we know, if we just give people all the time the option to surrender their freedom, and if they get some momentary convenience in exchange for surrendering their freedom, modern society and media are really good at pressuring everybody to give up their freedom. And the next thing you know, there's a society in which nobody has freedom anymore. So we need to defend freedom together for each other. If you think that there's a problem in using the GPL for your code, first look at GNU.org/licenses, and then write to licensing@gnu.org. And if anybody is telling you reasons why you suppose you can't use GPL, lots of people are wrong about what they say about that. So contact me if necessary. Make sure that the rules they're giving you are not.
Our forces
Apple
are under attack.
very hostile to the GNU GPL. Apple is directly and indirectly trying to pressure people not to defend the user's freedom. Please join us in standing up to Apple.
Unacceptable command.
Now, when we use the GPL, often the result is that businesses join in developing the free version. Since they're not allowed to port a non-free version of the remaining alternatives, they decide the best thing is to contribute to improving free software. And their contributions are welcome.
Not enough energy. Our forces
Now,
are under attack.
the one other point about this is you may have heard people use the term open source. I never use that term because it was invented for a very specific reason, to disconnect the software that's free that we developed from the ideals of the free software movement. They liked the software. They disagreed with our ethical views. They wanted to be able to promote the software such that no one Since then, in 1998, I have to go campaigning, giving so on about free software because otherwise people would only hear from the open source people who would never say these things. If you've heard open source advocates talking, you know they don't say these things. Well, lots of them cite my name and give the impression that I agree with them. I've seen articles that called me the father of open source. You know, it's enough to make me tear my hair out. But after a few seconds, I realized there's something constructive I can do. So I sent a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. And then I explain what the free software movement is and what it stands for and say, this is what I really stand for. That, of course, is the serious purpose of the letter to the editor, but it's fun to start with a joke. So, which you support is up to you. The problem is that most people supported open source, and the businesses preferred the term open source because then of course they'd avoid hinting that there's anything unethical about their proprietary software products. And so the mass media started saying open source, and generally you don't hear about free, libre software in the mass media or the tech media. But you can help change that. The software, whatever other people do, at least you will be making people aware of these ethical issues. And that's, in some sense, the easiest way to help us. It doesn't take much work. It does take persistence. When you, especially when you're in a discussion with other people who are saying open source, you say, this needs to be free software. We have to respect users' freedom. This is not just a question of what's most practically convenient. This is a question of our duty to others as citizens in a free society. You may not win, but even when you don't win, you'll help show other people what these ideas are, and that is advancing the cause, whether or not you win one particular issue. It's very important.
Unacceptable.
One of the things about free software is that schools and governments should only run free software. Schools, when they use a proprietary program, they that's the opposite of social school. And this is why at all levels of kindergarten, university, and adult education, educational activities must never use a proprietary program. And technical universities, they should teach reverse engineering to help people get the secrets out of proprietary programs so that the free world can implement them. So, proprietary software is one of the main ways of snooping on people, but it's not the only one. Proprietary software enables you to turn your own devices into spies. And the one way we can basically stop that is by improving our own software. But that's not the only kind of place, that's not the only way it's done. It's also done by systems that we work with but don't belong to us, like ISPs and phone companies. The phone companies record all the text messages you get or receive or send. They record all what calls you make, although in general not what you say. But and these records are kept often for years. And then anybody can get those records. Supposedly they're only available to Big Brother. But in fact, due to bad design in, I think it's Signaling System 7, which is a system for communication between phone networks, anybody who's willing to commit a crime can pretend to be another phone network and say, hey, I'm trying to find number 503-10904 and get the information about where it has been and what text messages it have, the text of the text messages and what calls it has made and anything. You know, the burglar who's interested in whether you're out of town can get that information. We require more minerals. Now, we can't directly change those systems because they don't belong to us. We have to go through politics to get them changed. We have to say to our governments, don't tell them they have to save data about us. Tell them they can't save any data about us. Protect our privacy. Now, governments have a long list of fears they can stir up in people so that people will give up their own freedom out of panic. Now, one of them is terrorists. But governments are when they cease to be democratic, are a much bigger danger than terrorists. You know, Bush II killed more Americans in war, supposedly aimed at Al-Qaeda, than the Al-Qaeda terrorists killed. And of course, that's only counting the Americans. There were also hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that Bush killed by that invasion, who were never really counted. The way we keep a government safe for us is by democracy. And that means stopping the government from tracking us all the time. But then there are also the private organizations that try to track us. it wasn't easy for me to get in here. They sent me an announcement saying, since you're a speaker, download our app, and that will be your registration. I wrote back saying, well, you know, I don't have anything that app could run on, and anyway, it's a proprietary program, so I wouldn't have it. And they said, well, we have a website too.
We require more minerals.
They said, we also have a website. Connect to our website and register. I visited their website and the screen appeared blank because it was designed to work entirely through proprietary JavaScript, and I have the settings in my browser so it checks the license of the JavaScript code, and if it's not free software, it doesn't run. So I wrote back. I was having tremendous fun, you see. They'd already bought the airline ticket. I had nothing to lose. Well, it would have been a loss for me if I couldn't have spoken to you, but the point is, I had them over a barrel. They had to find another way, and they did. But the point is, it's not just to me that they shouldn't do this. They shouldn't do this to you either. None of you should. In fact, you shouldn't have to say who you really are to get into an event. Any event. If maybe they charge money, okay,
we require more minerals.
You should be able to pay anonymously. So basically, there's been a progression of injustice in computing from proprietary software to web services, and the only thing worse than web services is proprietary mobile apps. The web service typically requires you to run some proprietary JavaScript code on your own machine. But beyond that, it's collecting lots of data on you. That proprietary JavaScript code often includes spying or malware. You know, it may fingerprint the browser trying to figure out who you are if you didn't want to tell it. This is nasty treatment of the public. The companies that do this deserve to be heaped with criticism and disgust. And they also deserve to be blocked. An ethical website, I say, runs with JavaScript disabled, so that the only data it gets from you is what you choose to give it. And people who invite you to an event shouldn't ask who you are. When I see an announcement that says register to Eventbrite, I send a message explaining what I'm about to do. Or possibly I posted on the announcement is posted on. Because people have got to stop tolerating being asked for data about themselves. But then there are the systems that snoop on us that we have. There are other systems that snoop on us. For instance, there are insurance companies that say you can pay less for insurance if you put our tracking device in your car. There are cars that are built with tracking devices in them. A friend of mine bought a Nissan, and I warned him it may be tracking you. He found out that it had cell phone modems built in. He unscrewed it. Bravo for him. But when the insurance company says you have to pay $50 a month if you don't let us track you, there's another method we can use to stop that. It's called democracy. We have to get laws passed saying insurance companies can't ask people to reveal data. You have to collect data outside of a certain limited set. I would say collecting data about the pattern of consumption of the car and saving it for a period of 1 minute before a crash, that's legitimate. And if you don't have a crash, they'll never get any data. But keeping track of where you have been, that must be forbidden. And by the way, be very scared of driverless cars. And not for the reason that you heard. They're making a big fuss about what if it's collide with somebody, and what if it has to decide to save this person or that person? But those things are going to be so rare that they're insignificant as an issue anyway. I expect that if they start letting driverless cars carry people around, it'll be because they're very safe. So let's not worry about that. Let's look at the real danger, which is that you don't control where it's going.
We require more.
Now, Uber is totally unjust because it makes users run a non-free app and then identify themselves. For these reasons, I absolutely refuse to ride in an Uber car, even if somebody else ran the app and paid for the ride, because I don't want Uber to succeed in its goal of wiping out ordinary taxis that you can call on the street and pay cash to. So I don't want to give Uber any tiny bit of success, and I hope you'll join me. Look at stalker.org/uber.html. But when and there are other reasons. For instance, I sometimes call the company Google because it pays drivers peanuts.
We require more risk.
Of course, it's going to fire all those drivers once it has driverless cars, but it'll still insist on identifying people. So here's the danger of that. You say, I want a car to take me to the theater. The car comes up, you get in, and it says, hello, Mr. Dissident. And the doors are locked, and it drives you to the secret police headquarters. You can't control that. And this points out there is a lot of discussion of whether AI is safe, focusing on the question of whether it might autonomously do things that destroy humanity. And so people talk about how do we make sure that the AI is under the control of humans. Well, I agree, that's a prerequisite. But then you've got to ask, which humans is it under the control of, and can you trust them? So just because the AI won't go totally rogue and wipe out humanity, that doesn't mean it's not bad. That doesn't mean we can trust it. If the AI is controlled by Google, it will be that anytime we deal with it, it will be spying on us, collecting data about us. It's not enough the AI has to be under control. Before you start, you've got to ask whether it's under your control. And with the voice response systems that exist today, that's not so. A computer with a microphone that talks to some sort of speech understanding system that's remote, that's on somebody else's server, you can't trust that. I was once visiting a house where there was an Alexa device, and it was in a room that I spent a lot of time sitting and working in, so I unplugged it. I figured that way it wouldn't be listening to my conversation. Those things are very dangerous, and we shouldn't get into them. Because even if most of the time it only listens when you say, Alexa, we change the motion all the time. Systems that exist only to snoop on people and track people, like cameras in the street that recognize car license plates, track cars everywhere, and they record every car that goes by. For our privacy's sake, we have to pass laws requiring those systems to be modified so that they only notice a license plate if it's either invalid or in a list of plates that are subject to specific court orders. Everyone else who is not wanted for arrest we require more Vespine gas. Those cars. It should only see the cars that have some legitimate reason to see. And that way, the system will do some good, and it won't do harm. What about cameras in the school to recognize people's faces or the backs of their heads? Those are extremely dangerous too. We have to distinguish between security cameras and surveillance cameras. A security camera records locally, and the recording gets overwritten after a few weeks. And if there's a crime, you go there and you take the recording and you use it. And otherwise, it just goes and gets overwritten. But once the camera is connected to any kind of transmission to any other place, then it starts being dangerous because it enables massive surveillance. So it's really important to prohibit surveillance cameras. Only security cameras should be allowed. I've got a series of proposals for how to make certain systems safe in terms of not exposing us to massive data collection. And the list of them is in gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-democracy.html.
Metamorphosis complete.
Oh, and I should also mention, we need to make our payments anonymous. We have developed something called the new Taler, T-A-L-E-R, which is an anonymous payment system. It's not a currency. Payments are not an official currency. But the point is, they're anonymous for the one who pays, but they are not anonymous for the one who receives the payment, the store. So the store can take payment from customers, and no one can tell who the customers were who paid, but the store, in order to convert these payments into money, has to take them to a particular entity, and thus the amount that each store received is established. We designed it this way because we do not want it to help tax evasion, but we do want people's purchases to be anonymous. Now you put this together with some sort of system where a whole bunch of local stores will receive a package for you with a code, and you just go there with the code and collect it, and you don't have to show an ID because you've got the code. This will make it possible to do anonymous purchases even for physical goods. But if you're paying something like paying a toll or paying for a download, that's straightforward. As long as you're doing the other things to maintain your anonymity, like going to a tour, making sure you don't log in, that your browser isn't fingerprintable, things like this, you'll get anonymous browsing even when you have to pay for it. Now, I don't care if I see an ad on the screen. I'm very good at ignoring it. But I hate traffic. So I've done things in my browser that they also block the ads. For me, it's a secondary point.
We require more
But I'm willing to go to great lengths to avoid surveillance, and that means that when a periodical says the only way to see our articles is either see the ads and be tracked or subscribe and be tracked, I say, it's off limits to me. I don't care. But I pay. If I can pay anonymously, I pay to see the articles I want to see. That's what we've got to insist on. We've got to make sure that we have a society data that's not being collected about us. But data once collected will be used by the organization that collected it. It can be used by rogue employees of that organization. It can be stolen in a data breach and then misused by others, or it can be taken by the state and misused by the state, which is the biggest danger of all. And we have to stop all those things from happening. And the way is, don't let the data be collected. Name registry and a hosting company. And they can cut off their services arbitrarily in practice, because each one writes terms of service, and then that company interprets those terms of service and judges whether you violated them and can cut you off. Most of them say they can change their terms of service at any time, and if you go on using their service after they announce the change, you've accepted it. Now, I don't know how it is here, but in Boston, if you rent an apartment, you sign a lease. And there are laws about what leases are allowed to require. If the landlord puts in something that the law doesn't allow, it's void. The landlord can't judge whether you violated the lease either. Even if the landlord has a valid complaint, such as if you didn't pay your rent, the landlord can't just kick you out. The landlord can go to court and present the evidence that you didn't carry out your side of the agreement. And if you didn't pay your rent and you can't justify it in some way, like a rent strike, then the landlord can get an order and get you evicted, but the landlord doesn't get to decide. This is what it means to have some rights. But in the internet, as of yet, we don't have rights. Important kinds of internet services that people in general need must not be allowed to choose their own terms of service, nor to interpret them.
1 more minute.
Sorry, why are you rushing me? Now, we saw how bad this could get when the US decided to kick WikiLeaks off the internet extrajudicially, not by a prosecution. Apparently, WikiLeaks had not broken any laws, and there was nothing to prosecute. But instead, officials began intimidating companies that were providing services to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks had rented an Amazon virtual server. After intimidation, Amazon reinterpreted its terms of service to say that publishing leaks was not allowed, and pulled the plug on the virtual server. Then it attacked some domain names and eliminated them, but fortunately, the US couldn't eliminate wikileaks.ch. And then what? Called which account? Or Assange, but not WikiLeaks.ch. This is I'm talking about the domain name that makes it possible to type in wikileaks.ch and get connected to the server that WikiLeaks puts there. That's what the US was trying to block. But then it tried to block payments for people to donate to WikiLeaks. And a long series of companies just announced arbitrarily they wouldn't send money to WikiLeaks. They would not obey their customers' requests. Even Visa and MasterCard. Then a company in Iceland, which was accepting credit card payments for its services, said it would accept also donations to WikiLeaks. They cut off credit card processing to the company. And then European Union law came into play. It apparently applies to some extent to Iceland. And it says that because Visa and MasterCard have a large market share, they're not allowed to arbitrarily cut off service. The company sued and it won. It forced them to reestablish its service and even to give money to donate to WikiLeaks. This was the beginning of a sign of what we really need. We've got to make it impossible to intimidate these services into cutting off something controversial.
So I think this is a very good closing sentence.
Now it's time for the auction.
Okay, so please give an applause for the...
And we should have legal requirements to do that, specifically to prevent massive surveillance. But still,
have a way to look at whoever committed a crime.
We require more minerals.
I've written a bunch of suggestions about methods we can use to do the jobs we want to do while protecting people's privacy. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance and yes, democracy.html. But the basic point of that is that there is a maximum level of surveillance of people in general that is compatible with democracy. And here is how I work out what that level is. Democracy means that the people control what the state does and how. But in order to control that, we need to know what it is. We need to monitor what the state does and how. But states often do things secretly and try to conceal from the public how they do things, what they're doing, especially the nastiest things, things that are war crimes or crimes against humanity. So how do we, or massive surveillance, and how do we find out in those cases? We find out through the help of whistleblowers, heroes that are willing to take a risk to show us what we have a right to know about our governments. And that gives us a chance to try to make them stop it. But governments tend to call these heroes spies. They try to put them in prison, as they did to Edward Snowden. And at this point, there's something I have a duty to say. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Assange also played a role, of course, in publishing things like the Collateral Murder video. And now the United States wants to put him in prison for ages for his acts of journalism. In 2012, when Assange was asking for asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, I had an open letter published in Quito in a newspaper suggesting how Ecuador could respond. I suggested give Assange asylum, but tell the government of Sweden that if it had accusations against Assange, it could interview him in the embassy, that basically that Ecuador could say it was not standing in the way of any possible charges. Of course, no charges have been made by Sweden against Assange. And the series of bizarre procedural decisions make it quite clear that the government of Sweden's goal in talking about maybe charging him was to get him into U.S. hands. It was not the way any other person accused of medium-level sexual misconduct would have been treated normally. By the way, those charges are not rape. The actions alleged don't constitute rape in any other country, but they are against the law in Sweden. I don't think it's a way that anybody should act. If he really did it, it wasn't nice. But that's another matter, what I suggested.
More minerals.
Because Ecuador was facing this conundrum.
We require more minerals.
President Correa
We
wanted to
require
protect
more
Assange
minerals.
from being sent to the U.S. to be prosecuted for journalism, but he did not want to interfere with any charges that might come from Sweden about his own personal actions. So I suggested a way to do that. And about a month later, that's what the government of Ecuador did. To what extent I had anything to do with that, I don't know. I hope that my suggestion played a role. In any case,
Spawn more overlords.
don't jail journalism. That is an attack on democracy.
Spawn more overlords.
So, but to get back to the final point I'm making, which is of utmost importance and generality, if the state can find the whistleblowers, it can imprison them. So if we want it to be safe to be a whistleblower, we must make sure that the general level of surveillance of people is not enough to find the whistleblowers. That's what we must do to have a democracy and human rights. We must make sure that the surveillance remains below that line. And today, surveillance has gone way above that line. If a measure to protect privacy fails to get rid of most of the surveillance that currently exists, it's not strong enough.
More overlords.
If it doesn't make all the companies that want to collect data about people say the sky is falling, it's not strong enough.
Metamorphosis complete.
Now, they will try to confuse us by talking about data protection, about limits on what data can be sold and how. There are usually loopholes in that. For instance, the companies that collect the data, they may, of course, associate it with particular people. They may know the name of the person in any record. They may sell it anonymized, deleting the direct personal identifiers. But research has shown that it's not that hard to figure out who it's about, or at least who it's probably about. So the data accumulators sell it to data brokers. The data brokers may get it without a name, but they can figure out that this record is about the same person as this one and this one and this one, and one of them has a name, so now it knows who all that data is about.
Unacceptable command.
And in the U.S., the FBI has the authority to demand secretly almost all databases of personal data without going to court. It just gives a, quote, national security letter, unquote, to some employee of whatever organization has the database and says, give this to us or and don't ever tell anybody. So the FBI will get all these databases with the names and combine them into a single record about each person. And this has gone on to a tremendous extent. It was recently published about how much data Palantir keeps about, well, I think they have 600 million records, That's enough to be everyone in the U.S. plus a lot of others.
Spawn more
And
overlords.
in some parts of the U.S., any one of those armed officials that like to shoot blacks can get the full record about basically anybody in a few seconds.
Our drones are under attack.
So we've got to make sure that those databases don't exist except where there has been some specific justification to make
The
them.
hive clusters
How much knowledge does they have? Because it means that if we don't want to be
we require
oppressed
more.
by that state, we've got to trust
We require more
that
Vespene
nobody
gas.
with the power to do so is ever going to decide to do so. Now, we know that we can't trust a lot of them. We recently found out
We require
that
more minerals.
the current head of the border police
Mineral field depleted.
was a member of a secret Facebook discussion group together with at least 1,000, maybe more staff, where they talked about basically despising. So, can we trust people like that? Ethical data about people? I don't think so. What we can trust is if the systems don't collect so much data, there's got to be specific kinds of data that is allowed to be collected for some reason. And that's all.
Mineral field. We require more minerals.
So how can we do this? Like political organizing. We have to know how to insist on measures that are adequate to deal with the problem, not the half measures that are always proposed. I suspect proposed because they wouldn't be too painful for the data collectors. They give more of an appearance of respecting our privacy than real respect. We have to realize that real privacy is anonymity. Real privacy is not restrictions on using massive databases about us. It is that they just don't know what we're doing every day.
Our forces are under attack. Not enough energy.
So, the smart city idea is, well, remember that when you hear smart, think spy. The idea of the smart city is to spy on everything everybody's doing and have a giant database that knows everything about people, and as a result, it could make life totally convenient for those who are considered important enough to deserve this convenience. Most people, I suspect. Most people may get some limited amount of it, but they will all be menaced by the possibility of omniscient enforcement of whatever laws may be imposed. So, the very idea of a smart city network of today is justice. There may be ways to make some AI techniques to make some civic systems work better.
We
If these
require
techniques
more
don't know
minerals.
who's going weird, don't know who that person is, then they're safe, and if they can do some good, why not? So we have to make sure that they don't know. And we can see the tremendous pressure to implement these spy cities by tracking people. That's where we have to oppose it. We have to say, must do this in a way that doesn't identify individuals and doesn't collect the data that could enable anyone to identify individuals. Then it's okay. And we see drivers' insurance companies offering a discount if the company can monitor how you drive.
We require.
Well, if that's done in a way that doesn't sleep on what you do, maybe it's okay. If I were sure that the system would not know where I go, it would only notice how I drive, I could live with that. I don't tend to drive
We require more minerals.
I
We
don't
require
drive
more
all that
minerals.
frequently. I'm probably not one of
We
the best
require more
drivers,
minerals.
but at least I don't do very many
We require.
absurd, stupid
We
things.
require more minerals. We require more minerals.
Oh,
We require
it's a fly. Would you like to empty this
We
cup
require
and another? Yes, yeah. Yes. I don't know whether the grass likes tea. But of course they enforce it, though. We don't have laws to stop them. They will enforce it, though. So, at this point, I'd just like to say briefly that there are ways you can help the free software movement. So, freedom requires a sacrifice sometimes. Although, when you really value freedom, you don't see that as the sacrifice. You don't see the practical inconvenience you accept in order to keep your freedom as the sacrifice. On the contrary, it's the freedom that you would be sacrificing if you accepted those expensive conveniences offered by online disservices and other forms of surveillance. So, we need to insist on free software so as not to be tracked through our own computers and our own products. So how do you help? Well, if you've got a talent for programming, write free software, contribute to free software projects. But most people don't have a talent for programming. So instead of forcing yourself to try to program, do something else. Could you put in a little bit more? That's so little. It's so pitifully little. I really like tea. So if you don't have a talent for programming, do something else like organizing the efforts to campaign for the free software movement. We need people to form local activist groups. We need speakers. If you don't know how to speak in public, well, join Toastmasters. There must be a Toastmasters club here. You can get good at it. We need people to persuade schools and governments to move to free software. Schools are making the students use computers that spy on them so that they can then run proprietary programs that enable other companies to spy on them and restrict them also through all the other unjust effects of proprietary software. This should not be allowed in a school. And government agencies, well, they do their computing for the people. And they have a duty to the people, a responsibility to maintain control over that computing rather than letting it fall into private hands, because the government's responsibility is to make sure its computing is done properly for the people for whom the government exists. And we need people to spread these ideas and organize to make it happen. You can help other users. If you're an expert user of GNU/Linux, that's the GNU operating system with Linux as the kernel, then start a GNU/Linux user group and help other users. Or if there's already a GNU/Linux user group, go there and help users. If there's already one, but it calls itself erroneously a Linux user group, which means not giving us any credit for our work, then you could go there and help users and explain that the group really should change its name. And just by saying free software, freie Software, you're helping the free software movement. You see, most people who use or even talk about free software don't know that term anymore. In 1998, the people who didn't want to think of this as an issue of freedom and justice invented a different term to use. They call it open source. And they constructed a different discourse that presents the matter purely in terms of convenience and practical advantage and never raises the moral questions I mentioned in my talk. They carefully avoid those issues because those issues might make some business executives uncomfortable. And they have been so effective that most of the users who've heard about me think that I advocate open source, which I have never done. I have to explain like several times a week in response to emails, I'm sorry, there's a misunderstanding here. You're talking about open source. That's not what I'm in favor of. That's a different idea. So read about the difference, please, and tell me if you agree with the free software movement. Well, just by saying free software, you can spread the awareness that there is a free software movement. I've seen articles published that called me the father of open source. I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explain about the free software movement. I present its name and the ideas that I've told you today, or earlier forms that I had at the time. And that, of course, is the serious purpose of that letter, to make people aware that there's an issue of freedom and justice here, and open source covers it up. And please don't think that I join in covering it up. But I can't do enough. You, by making an effort to stop talking about open source and talk about freie Software instead, you can help do this if you want to, because you're free. If open source expresses what you are in favor of, well, you're free to say that too. And there are a lot more ways to help in gnu.org/help. We have dozens of different kinds of work that would be useful for you to do to help us. And you can join the Free Software Foundation at fsf.org, or you could do it here and pay your dues in cash. And now it's time for the auction. This is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign it for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin. Every penguin should have a GNU. We can accept payment with cash or through a bank card if it can make international purchases by phone, but you have to write a bunch of stuff down, so it's a little inconvenient. We can also accept Bitcoin payment if you have something here to make the payment with. And does anyone know if there is an ATM machine, a bank machine to get cash near here? There is. So another option is you bid, you go out, you get cash, and you come back, because I'm going to be here answering questions for a while. So when you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount as loud as you can, because I have hearing problems. And if you speak quietly, I won't know what you said, so I can't do anything with your bid. And I'm going to start with the regular price of 25 euros. Do I get 25 euros for this adorable GNU? How much? 30. The first time I couldn't hear. Second time I heard you. 30. I've got 30. Do I get 35 for this? How much? I've got 35. Do I get 40? I've got 40. Do I get 45? I've got 45. That's funny. This is not the only time that has happened in my auction. I've got 45. Do I get 50? 50 or more for this? How much? 50? What are you bidding? I've got 55. Do I get 60 or more for this adorable GNU? I've got 60. Do I get 65 or more? 65 or more for this adorable GNU. I've got 65. I've got 70. Do I get 75 or more for this how much? I've got 75. Do I get 80? I've got 80. Do I get 85? I've got 85. Do I get 90? I've got 110. Do I get 120? 120 for this adorable GNU. Last chance to bid 120 or more for this adorable GNU. Last chance. Going. What? What? Are you bidding? Are you bidding? Okay, so last chance to bid 120 or more for this adorable GNU. Going. Gone for 110. Please come up and pay. How do you wish to pay? Okay. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'll sign after the questions. I don't want to delay that more than necessary. Thank you. The GNU is now yours.
Thank you.
This is an adorable book. My book of essays, Free Software, Free Society. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. And the rules of the auction are the same, and the starting price is the same, 25 euros, and I can sign it also. By the way, if you brought a shirt, I can sign those also. Is there anyone selling outside now? Harold, is anyone selling? Because, you know, the merchandise is still there. I hope you'll get some, and the stickers are still there. Please take stickers. I hope all those stickers will be taken and put to good use. Any place people will see it is good use. Just don't put it on your shirt, because it won't last. put it in a place where it will last for a while. So, do I get 25 euros for this? How much? 30. Do I get 35? How much? I've got 35. Do I get 40? How much? Say what you're bidding. I've got 40. Do I get 45 euros? How much? I got 45. Do I get 50 or more for this adorable GNU? Sorry, adorable book. How much? As soon as you start waving your arm, please shout the amount. Don't wait for me to look at you. I've got 55. Do I get six? I've got 60. Do I get 65 or more? I've got 65. I've got 70. 75 or more? Do I get 70? How much? What? Speak. I've got 75. Do I get 80 for this adorable book? 80 or more to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom. Last chance to bid 80 or more for this adorable book to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom. Going, gone for 75. Please come up and pay. I'll be ready to sign it when the questions roll.
Okay, thank you.
Now it's time for questions.
First question, Richard, to you, to the audience. Should we record the questions and answers?
I can't hear you at all. What?
Should we record the discussion or switch off the camera?
I would like to, but because I think it's useful to publish that.
So we can make a
I
compromise.
suggest that those of you who have questions, please line up at that microphone and ask your line up in advance. That way, the system works efficiently and fairly. It's fairer because you don't have to wait to be recognized. You get in the line, you get your turn.
Okay, I'm not very experienced as far as data collecting or prevention of data collecting is concerned. So I've just got a question of maybe minor importance, and that is, you said that the mobile phone spy on us. So the simple question is, how can I prevent my mobile phone from spying on me?
You can't.
No.
Can't
I just break it up and put certain parts on maybe the upper part of the kitchen, the battery?
Oh, well, okay. If you want to do physical modification on it, maybe you could, but it wouldn't work as a mobile phone if it weren't spying on you.
Right, so while I'm sleeping, I might break it up and put away the batteries, and then everything is all right?
You could, or you could just, throw it away or give it to somebody else who wants to be spied on. Or
Okay.
I've never had one. I learned these things around 2003 because I was considering whether to get a mobile phone. And back then they were not, quote, smart, unquote. They didn't have user installable software at all. All they did was the basic stuff. So that issue didn't arise for me, but I still had to consider whether they were mistreating me, and I found out that they were. Next question.
What about the GPS that is installed in cars, firmly
Installed in what?
in motor cars?
Oh, well, yeah, if I had a car, I would basically stop the antennas from functioning. I would not tolerate a connected car. I would insist on disconnecting it. So there are two antennas. There's, I believe, a cellular modem. And of course, through that, the phone network can track the position of the car. And then there may be the GPS as well, which would enable the car to help track it even more finely, and I would make both of those antennas non-functional. Now, one way is to disconnect it, or remove it. Another way might be to wrap it in aluminum foil, because these are radio communications, and metals do not allow radio waves to go through them, because metals are conductors.
In addition, I want to say, I personally, I do not have a car that has a GPS, but I have bought a GPS myself anonymously, which does
well,
not track me.
It's different.
That's different, yes.
It's different because that means the GPS device you got, I assume it's not connected in any way to the car's systems. So maybe your GPS device doesn't transmit anything about where you are, but maybe it does. If it's proprietary software inside, then you may be invited every so often to update the maps. Well, guess what else it does at the same time as downloading updated maps? It uploads where you have been. But nowadays you can get free software to do the same job using the map data from OpenStreetMap.
Thank you.
Okay, so you briefly touched upon the topic of...
Speak louder, please. I can't hear you.
Okay, so you briefly touched upon the subject of surveillance versus democracy. And so you probably heard about the Fridays for Future protests. I'm going...
The what?
Fridays for Future protests, in essence.
Yes.
You know, it's a movement which has very strong demands for environmental policies. And I heard people say that, well, ultimately democracy is or might not be equipped to deal with this challenge. And maybe China's system might,
Actually,
and
let me answer.
The question from my point is
before you say that, I want to talk to what they said. You can finish in a moment, but we don't really have effectively democracy. What we have is plutocracy. The rich rule. And that is behind many other injustices. Some of those injustices are directly economic, like falling wages for most people, precarious work, but also increasing monopoly or oligopoly in many fields, the concentration of industry, and also the accelerating use of fossil fuels. The reason we have been unable to democratically put an end to these fossil fuels and start moving to renewable energy is because these fossil fuel companies with their money have so much power that they've been able to block it all with disinformation and confusion and just don't pay attention, as well as plain old lies. And so the people who say that democracy is not up to this, they've been misled. They think that what's failing is democracy, but in fact what we know is that what's failing is that we don't really have effective democracy.
Okay, so you don't see a contradiction there, because my question was aimed towards, if there were a contradiction, what kind of challenge would it take so everything would be grabbed or on the table?
The challenge is to restore democracy, to defeat the plutocracy.
I see. Thank you.
By the way, I participated in one of the Fridays for Future protests in March. It was not easy for me to get the details of the protest because I refused to run non-free software, and many websites send non-free software in the pages, and then it runs in your browser, and I won't let it run. Our browser has something called Libre.js, which checks the programs in the pages to make sure that they're free. And their publication, well, it actually made use of Facebook. And then it had another site where you could get the details, except that if you tried to, that most of the site depended on non-free software, and I wasn't sure I could even find out about what time the protest was. How sad. And it was purely through failure to pay attention. If they had cared even a little bit about respecting the freedom of the people they were talking to, they could have. I wish I could convince them. I don't know how.
I thank you for the great talk, and I'm also happy to personally thank you for all the great work that has been done with the Free Software Foundation.
I'm more concerned about the work that remains to be done, actually.
Yes, exactly.
Please get to your question.